Will Trump's tariff war make America great again or make adversaries stronger? And could it all backfire on the U.S. economy?
Canada is making a strategic pivot, deepening trade ties with China and the broader Asian market. As tensions with the U.S. escalate, this shift could redefine Canada's economic future, challenge American dominance in North American trade, and reshape global supply chains in ways we haven't seen before. In early February 2025, President Donald Trump made a bold move by imposing hefty tariffs on Canadian goods. For his reasons, he cited concerns over illegal immigration and the rising fentanyl crisis. Canada didn't take this lightly. In response, they fired back with their own tariffs, 25% on a range of American products. We're talking beverages, cosmetics, and paper products, altogether worth a staggering 30 billion Canadian dollars, which is about 20 billion US dollars. But that was just round one. A second wave of tariffs is already in the works, targeting major industries like cars, steel, aluminum, beef, dairy, and aerospace. This next batch is valued at a jaw-dropping 125 billion Canadian dollars, which is about 85 billion US dollars. So, are we on the edge of a full-blown trade war? If so, how will it hit energy prices, inflation, and global markets? Could it spiral into a crisis that disrupts jobs, businesses, and supply chains worldwide? This isn't just a political standoff. It's about your wallet, gas prices, and everyday costs. Stay with us as we break down what this means for you, the economy, and the future of global trade. The new 25% tariff means higher prices on anything coming from Canada, whether it's paper, cars, or food. And it's not just an extra tax. It's stacked on top of existing fees, making Canadian imports significantly more expensive. Energy imports are hit with a slightly lower 10% tariff, but that relief may not last. Trump has already signaled that by mid-February, tariffs on oil and gas could go even higher. Why does this matter? Well, the Pacific Northwest depends heavily on Canadian gas, and states like New York and those in the Midwest frequently switch between importing and exporting gas based on demand. If tariffs increase, expect price spikes, especially in winter when heating demand surges. And we've already seen this in action. In January 2025, record-breaking cold drove U.S. gas imports from Canada to an all-time high. That month, Canadian gas made up 7% of the total U.S. supply. So why is Trump doing this? Officially, he says it's about illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking. He claims drug cartels are using Canada, Mexico, and China to flood the U.S. with illicit drugs, leading to what he calls a national emergency. On Inauguration Day, Trump went as far as to say these cartels were responsible for 250,000 to 300,000 American deaths per year.
The fentanyl coming through Canada is massive. People are getting killed and families are being destroyed.
The White House backed him up, with spokesperson Caroline Leavitt stating that fentanyl has killed tens of millions of Americans. That number is highly exaggerated, but the political message is clear. Trump is using trade policy as a tool in his broader crackdown on drugs and border security. But is this really about fentanyl? Canada strongly denies being a weak link in the drug trade, and many experts argue this isn't about border security at all. It's about economic leverage. By pressuring Canada with tariffs, Trump could be pushing for better trade terms or simply using this as a way to appear tough ahead of the next election. Regardless of the reason, Canada isn't sitting quietly. If Trump's tariffs go into effect, Canada is ready to hit back hard. They've already lined up 25% tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. imports, targeting everything from American beer and bourbon to Florida's famous orange juice. Canada will also tax clothing, sports equipment, and household appliances. Their message to the U.S. is clear. These tariffs will hurt American jobs, American manufacturers, and American consumers. In a press conference, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned that these tariffs could shut down auto assembly plants and raise prices at grocery stores and gas stations. This is such a big deal because the US and Canada share one of the world's largest trade relationships. Every single day, goods worth over $2.5 billion cross the 5,600-mile border. In 2023, Canada exported nearly 550 billion Canadian dollars worth of goods to the United States, which is more than 3/4 of Canada's total exports. Energy exports alone made up 30% of that trade, while manufacturing contributed around 15%. And most importantly, U.S. trade accounts for nearly 18% of Canada's GDP and supports over 2.4 million Canadian jobs. With stakes this high, neither side can afford a prolonged trade war. However, at the last minute, Trump decided to hit the pause button, delaying the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for 30 days. This announcement came just hours before the 25% tariffs were set to take effect. So, what changed? Trudeau and Trump had a phone call, and in that call, Canada agreed to a major crackdown on border security. To keep the U.S. happy and avoid an all-out trade war, Canada pledged to spend $1.3 billion on new helicopters, surveillance tech, and personnel at the border. Trudeau also promised to appoint a fentanyl czar to focus on the crisis and officially designate drug cartels as terrorist organizations. He's also prepared to launch a Canada-U.S. joint strike force targeting fentanyl, organized crime, and money laundering. These moves, according to Trudeau, will cost Canada another $200 million. The U.S. tariffs are paused, but only for 30 days. That means if Trudeau doesn't follow through on his promises, Trump could easily bring them back, and the trade war could reignite overnight. So, what's the real endgame here? And more importantly, how will all of this impact energy prices, inflation, and global markets? Economists are warning that this trade battle between the US and Canada is already leaving scars, and the damage might not be easy to reverse. The effects of US tariffs on Canadian prices won't be the same across all industries, seeing that it all depends on how much a sector relies on trade with the US. The more dependent an industry is, the more severe the fallout. Some companies might be able to navigate and find new markets, but for others, that's easier said than done. Take energy and manufacturing, for example. These are some of Canada's biggest exports to the US, and they're among the hardest hit. The auto industry is facing a major shakeup, and the oil sector, which sent $143 billion worth of crude oil to the US in 2023, is now staring down a 10% tariff imposed by Trump. Even though it's lower than other tariffs when you're dealing with billions of dollars, even a small tax can have massive consequences. Then there's agriculture and forestry. Industries that don't just rely on US trade, they're practically built on it. A staggering 86% to 96% of Canada's wood, paper, and cereal exports go straight to American buyers. And finding new markets isn't as simple as flipping a switch. If US tariffs price these goods out of reach, Canadian producers could be left scrambling, their warehouses full but their revenues collapsing. But the damage won't stop at individual businesses. It will ripple across the entire economy. Lower demand means slower production, job cuts, and a hit to consumer spending. A weakening job market drains money from local businesses, squeezing everything from retail to real estate. And then there's the supply chain nightmare. Many Canadian manufacturers operate in deeply intertwined North American supply networks, where materials and components crisscross the border multiple times before becoming a final product. Tariffs throw a wrench into this system, jacking up costs, causing delays, and forcing businesses into costly restructures or supplier changes. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers is also sounding the alarm. They warn that if Canada retaliates by restricting energy exports to the US, Washington could hit back even harder, and that's a dangerous gamble. Ontario and Quebec depend on the US for crude oil, natural gas, and refined petroleum. If this escalates, Canada could be staring down energy shortages and skyrocketing prices, turning an already fragile situation into a full-blown crisis. Trade tensions aren't just about dollars and tariffs. They shape global alliances, and right now, Canada is at a crossroads. With the US tariffs, Canada is being forced to rethink its economic dependence on its southern neighbor. But this isn't the first time Canada has faced this dilemma. Back in 1972, a Canadian policy paper known as the Third Option explored whether Canada should strengthen US ties, maintaining the status quo, or diversifying to reduce economic dependence on America. Decades later, the same debate is back. So, what are Canada's choices now? In 1988, Canada chose economic integration by signing a free trade agreement with the US, which spurred growth, but also increased its dependence on American policy decisions. Over time, this vulnerability became evident. Fast forward to today, and the US has shifted its focus, prioritizing national security over trade, leaving Canada to navigate the consequences. But Canada seems to have learned its lesson. Now, economic diversification is taking center stage. Strengthening trade ties beyond the US is no longer just a strategy. It's a necessity. Due to ongoing trade tensions with the United States, Canadian oil producers are actively exploring alternative buyers in Asia, including China, Japan, and South Korea. The completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in May 2024 has allowed for increased shipments to these markets, significantly reducing Canada's dependence on the US for energy exports. China, Japan, and South Korea are all looking to secure stable energy sources, making Canadian crude increasingly attractive. These nations are also key players in Canada's broader diversification efforts, as industries beyond energy, such as agriculture, mining, and technology, seek new export destinations. China, in particular, is playing a pivotal role in Canada's shift. In the late 2024, Chinese refiner Rangang Petrochemical secured multiple cargoes of Canadian crude, marking a major step in deepening energy ties. With China's demand for heavy crude oil surging, Canada is well positioned to capitalize on this growing market. Beyond oil, China remains Canada's second-largest trading partner, accounting for nearly 12% of total imports and 3.9% of total exports in 2023. That year, Canada imported $64 billion worth of goods from China, with mobile phones leading the way, while exporting $21.9 billion worth of goods, with oil and agricultural products among the top commodities. The push toward Asian markets isn't just about opportunity, it's about necessity. To reduce reliance on US trade and avoid risks from political tensions, Canada is strengthening ties with China, Japan, and South Korea, expanding beyond energy into agriculture and technology. This effort also extends beyond energy, as Canada looks to expand agricultural and technological exports to these fast-growing economies. However, this shift brings new challenges. The US views China's growing involvement in Canada's economy as a strategic threat, particularly in sectors like oil, agriculture, and mining. While diversification lessens vulnerability to US tariffs, it also introduces geopolitical and environmental risks. The big question remains: will Canada successfully balance these competing pressures, or will its reliance on new markets create fresh vulnerabilities? The coming years will be crucial in determining the long-term success of this shift. With its economy at risk and political tensions on the rise, Canada stands at a critical crossroads. Although the immediate threat of US tariffs has been temporarily lifted, Canadians are left with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. While the situation seems to have de-escalated for now, the lingering question remains: where does Canada go from here? For Canada, this is a crossroads moment. If Trump follows through with long-term 25% tariffs, economists predict a severe recession within 6 months. Quebec's premier estimates that up to 100,000 jobs could be lost. With tariffs of this scale, economists warn that Canada could plunge into a severe recession, with the initial shock hitting within the first 2 years and the risk of prolonged economic stagnation lasting up to 3 years. While the US, with its larger and less trade-dependent economy, could absorb the impact more easily, Canada, highly reliant on exports, would bear the heaviest burden. But Canada isn't powerless. Ottawa knows Trump has political weak spots: his promise to keep prices low and his ties to key industries in swing states. The challenge? Pressuring him to ease or delay tariffs before a full-blown trade war erupts. But there's a growing realization: this may be just the first battle in a prolonged standoff. Meanwhile, Trudeau's response has sparked criticism, seen by many as a concession rather than a strong counter. If tariffs hold, 25% from the US and retaliatory duties from Canada, both economies will take a hit. Inflation will rise, growth will weaken, but Canada, with its smaller, trade-reliant economy, stands to bear the heaviest burden. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem warns that higher U.S. import costs will push inflation up, while reduced exports and investment could permanently lower GDP. Growth forecasts for 2025 to 2026 are already down to 1.8%, partly due to tighter immigration policies. Sluggish exports and rising costs could trigger job losses, production cuts, and weaker consumer spending, further straining Canada's economy. If the tariffs are imposed, Canada will face a double burden: higher inflation and weaker growth. As the country prepares for potential disruptions, its ability to navigate this uncertain economic terrain will depend on its policy responses, including trade negotiations and monetary policy flexibility. How Canada handles this next phase will determine its long-term economic resilience. So, the big question remains: will this trade war reshape North America's economy for years to come? Or can a last-minute deal prevent economic disaster? The next few months will be critical. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so we can make videos for you. See you in the next one.